All right, welcome everybody to our discussion of the first book of the Gallic Wars by Caesar. So, what were your thoughts? Anything general before we?
Well, let me kick it off because I was the one that brought it up in the last meeting, and so we read Tacitus's work on Germania,
Mhm.
and we were discussing about which book we would like to or what section of a book we would like to read next time, and I brought up the Gallic Wars. I've already read it because I feel like that there's definitely some parallels with the Germania, especially the ways of describing tribes and just a lot of anecdotal information. Obviously, though, it's much more driven by war and not just talking about the civilization. But while one reads through it, um, so here and there, one understands more about the Celts or the Germans in that time. So I thought it's a pretty exciting and very dynamic text to read.
Yeah, it was interesting because I've never really read a well, that's not true. I have read a military text before, but not from the first person perspective. So and that was actually one of the notes that I had immediately was that so it was written by Julius Caesar, but he's writing in the third person as if he was like an observer of himself, which I think is interesting. Does anybody have any like thoughts about why that might have occurred?
I've
I think
heard
it's
rumors that he had writers with him, so it was not actually Caesar writing it down, but his writers writing it down. But I'm not sure about that. It's just rumors I've read.
Perhaps he had scribes with him and he kind of compiled everything they wrote and then edited himself.
my guess is it's a bit more of
Yeah.
a propaganda tool. I mean, because if you read Caesar did this and Caesar did that, like the name really is ingrained in your mind. So I think it was more of an intentional choice.
Yeah, and I think that so one of the things that really came across to me in the reading is all of the so it's kind of this dichotomy between Caesar, taking revenge for previous wrongs that had been done to the Roman people, but also being merciful whenever possible. So it's like he's intentionally trying to propagandize. I think that definitely comes through in certain places. Um, I was also so one of the things that struck me from kind of from the beginning was this trope of like burning down your village behind you so that you have nowhere to go. So I feel like this has come up in other places, and I'm curious the extent to which it is like a thing that actually happened versus a like a literary device. I don't know. I'm just kind of curious about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's very intense. I believe it was the Helvetii tribe that was trying to move over because apparently, they're very constricted in the Swiss mountains,
Yeah.
apparently. And but I mean, I find it so intense to burn all the I don't know about all, but a lot of cities and villages and uproot everybody. And it's kind of weird because I mean, then they would just leave pretty much a wasteland behind, which also I don't know. I just found it so odd that they would undertake that.
On the other hand, if you move and you're not planning to come back and you know that your place is going to be inhabited by enemies,
Hmm.
I wouldn't want to give them a nice house either.
Yeah,
But
and it oh, go
oh,
ahead.
sorry. I was just thinking though that if they burn down the houses, that means also women, children, elderly, baggage trains. So it's although there's a fighting force definitely there. I mean, one could make the argument that they're incredibly slowed down by taking everybody in society with them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but at the same time, I think that it was supposed to be like motivation as well, because they now have to protect all of these other people. But I definitely think there is a argument to not leaving anything behind for other people to take over. And yet it still happens in the narrative, right? So we have Germans that are crossing the Rhine and inhabiting the regions that were supposedly laid waste by the Helvetii. So that was actually kind of a strange incongruity to me, that they're somehow still okay with the locations or the general land, even though they had already burnt everything down.
Yeah, I mean,
Burning also gave very fertile land.
It's true.
Yeah. They didn't salt the ground.
Yeah.
Exactly.
if I remember correctly, because I've been to Geneva in Switzerland a few times. I mean, there isn't that much agriculture in that area. I mean, obviously there's some, but not like the rows of wheat or
No.
like large scale farming like that. So I mean, I could kind of understand that they wanted to do a land swap, but on the other hand, it seems like not only did they want to uproot their tribe, but they kind of wanted to also take over Gaul,
Yeah.
or either take over or join tribes to have like not a state, but more of a cohesive region.
I can imagine that if I just think local tribe, not having like Rome had with grains coming from Egypt, coming from other regions, you need to be self-sufficient. That might be easy, and we're not high up in the Alps.
Yeah. Yeah, and one of the things that really comes across, or really came across to me throughout the narrative, was how preoccupied Caesar was with the food supply. So it's mentioned almost in every single paragraph, something about whether or not there's enough grain, and whether it
Well,
needs to.
that is very important for military use to the supply chain and whatnot.
If you don't feed them, they're not going to fight.
Right.
And depending on where you are, like sometimes Roman armies could conquer a land and just feed off the land. But I mean, it really depends on if there's something, for foraging, or is there enough cattle available, or enough, grain storages that they captured. So like sometimes they can, but sometimes they have to feed themselves, which is a lot harder to do, especially, when mountains and large rivers are involved.
Yeah. What did you think about the characterization of the Germanic tribes here versus in Tacitus? Was there anything similar or different?
I didn't really pick up on much differences. Obviously, the focus is on the Celtic tribes, or sorry, Gaul. So I mean, the Germans are definitely mentioned, especially moving people and moving troops. But I haven't noticed, for instance, major discrepancies between the two. Plus, it's only like anecdotal information about the Germans.
Yeah,
included.
The thing that I thought was really kind of funny is that so like the one descriptor that is used is they're really tall. Like, and that came across, I think, in Tacitus as well, that there's this like height difference. In addition to the one leader being very haughty, and I just kind of imagine like the Germans viewing the Romans as like pipsqueaks or something, like in comparison. But like we don't know like how much actually taller they were, and if they like really were even. So I just.
But if I look at nowadays, I'm from the Netherlands.
Yeah.
I live with a Swede who is 193. I haven't got a clue what that is in feet.
Uh,
But when I meet my friends in Italy, the men, my peers, and I'm not a very tall woman. I'm 170. Well, yes, I am tall. I'm 176, so nearly 6 feet. But Italian people are shorter
yeah.
than Northern Europeans.
Yeah. I wonder the like how different it was back then though too. Because like if we're thinking about so the way in like nutrition and that sort of thing, you know, nutrition was across the board worse. But I wonder if there was a real discrepancy between, you know, Mediterraneans and people living
Was
in
it
Germany.
just north of the Limes in the Netherlands? They have found a man, a Roman soldier who fell down a well. He's found in Velse, and they found his whole skeleton, so they could find out how long he was.
Oh wow.
And he was very, very tall. He was a lot taller than I expected. He was over 6 feet, if I remember correctly.
Mm.
But I'm not sure whether he was actually from Italy or from somewhere else in the Roman Empire.
Right, because that's the other thing that, you know, is never mentioned, is that the majority of, or not the majority, but a lot of the soldiery was auxiliaries or people that were not Italian necessarily. So when Caesar says things like they were all afraid because they were supposedly monsters or so much taller than them, you would think, okay, how many of these people were Gauls? How many of these people were Germans themselves? And or, you know, from either even further afield. I think he only mentions the 10th Legion, so I'm not actually sure where they're from. I can see if I can try and find it.
By the way, while you do find it,
Mhm.
so 2 years ago, I was in Switzerland exploring some Roman sites, and I actually went to 2 special exhibitions, one in Augusta Raurica and the other one in Avenches, about Roman skeletons that were found. Now, obviously, you know, these aren't skeletons roughly, you know, 50 BC. These are, you know, skeletons, you know, 1st, 2nd, 3rd century of locals. And normally they were on average shorter than us. And but I mean, sometimes these skeletons, through like the teeth or a few other items, so they could figure out, you know, where they came from. You know, there was definitely migration, and also the nutrition and how bones, you know, broke and healed. So I found it very interesting. Obviously, though, I mean, there's no books or anything, so they only have like a few sentences about these skeletons of just, you know, like what to look on. But I remember that they definitely weren't taller than us, and that was, yeah, in Switzerland. So I mean, I would presume they would have more of the quote unquote so Gaulish DNA than, like, you know, Italic DNA.
Yeah. So as I was just Googling, the 10th Legion is from Spain. So these were primarily Hispanic, it looks like. So Southern European, but we don't know what kind of mix. Wanted to see if there's anything else that really stuck out of my notes. There were two separate things that I came across that I thought was a little bit curious. So the translation, and I didn't actually look at the Latin, but the translation that I have repeatedly refers to the different regions of Helvetia as cantons. And I know that they use this in modern English, but I'm curious whether or not it is a historical term or not. I don't know if anybody knows.
Maybe it's an approximation.
Yeah. Because he seems to use it in two different meanings. So Canton is in like a region, but also Canton is in like a military sense as well, as like a kind of similar to like what a legion would be, but of Gauls. And I could probably look back into the actual text to see if something like that word is actually used, or if it's.
Yeah, I mean, I when I reread it, I used your link, and I believe the translation was from 1869
Mhm.
or roughly thereabouts. And I'm not sure, it might just be an anachronism. So just because, you know, Switzerland now has these cantons, so they just decided to use that term just, you know, for a basic understanding.
Yeah, that was my thought myself, was that it's probably an anachronism, but I didn't look at the Latin. And the other thing that I thought was interesting is, and I feel like I've heard this in other contexts before as well. So there was a part where Caesar is talking about how the gods allow wicked people to persist in their wrongdoing, and and give them good fortune, so that later on they can be punished longer and for more. And I feel like I've heard this in like other contexts before, like in like a Christian context before. And it just struck me as really curious that he would make a point to say that explicitly. And I don't know if anybody else has ever heard anything like that kind of logic before.
It sounds familiar.
Yeah. So it was just kind of interesting to have that through line between, different cultures, perhaps. Okay.
So what does everyone else think about the initial dispute? Because I sort of feel like, at least towards the beginning, it's not clear that Caesar actually is entitled necessarily to interfere with these plans that the Helvetii have to conquer Gaul, because it's all technically parts of Gaul that are not controlled by Rome that they're attacking at first. They just wanted to cross through Roman territory. He said
Right.
no, they cross through somewhere else, and then he attacks them. So it seemed to me like they aren't really justified in their conquest, and maybe they should be stopped, but his pretext was pretty weak for getting involved. What do you think?
Weren't there two reasons? One of them because of history, because of I believe it was a consul, and also his father-in-law's grandfather were killed. And the second reason was because they would have this big army on Rome's border. I mean, I could understand both reasons strategically and also just revenge. And of course, I mean, Rome always meddled in other people's affairs. I mean, they were client kingdoms, and that's just what they did throughout the empire. Is that, if they didn't conquer them, that they at least try to exert some influence on their neighbors.
The thing that go ahead.
Oh, well, what I was going to say was that I thought that, generally speaking, there had to be some kind of a casus belli, that either an official ally of Rome had been attacked, or Rome itself had been attacked or insulted in some way, in order for Rome to go out and conquer a place. So in this case, there didn't seem to be that. That's why it was surprising to me. As for the revenge aspect, he says that if the Helvetii were to cooperate with him at one point during their negotiations, he could overlook that. But it was funny because they actually made a point of pointing out their previous attacks on Rome themselves.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not helping your case. What are you doing?
Yeah, it was very weird. So I think he does make this sort of like, I mean, relatively thin pretext that some of their allies in Gaul are being, overtaken. So I could see that as being okay, but I feel like the big glaring elephant in the room that he doesn't bring up is that the Gauls sacked Rome in prehistory. So like why not use that one? Like that's a real big one if you really want to, knock over some Gauls. So the whole thing with the one legion is just like, really, that's the whole reason you're going to do this right now. But he does make it explicit that he's, I'm doing this on behalf of the Roman people, so. Anything else?
There was an interesting anecdote towards the beginning that I thought that was very amusing. He says that the tribes that are furthest away from the Roman borders are the best fighters because they're also the furthest away from the traders, and I forgot the exact wording, but basically, like, I don't know, like trade goods like effeminate men or something like that.
Yeah, and he also says that they're also the most in contact with the Germans, so they are constantly fighting them. So they have to be, I guess, as well.
I find it an amazing waste of human resources to constantly be fighting your neighbors on like such a small scale.
Mhm.
And I mean, I also like the whole, I mean, it's an oversimplification when people say divide and conquer, but I mean, these tribes were pretty much divided. Obviously, the further you read into the book, the more tribes, come together to try to defeat Caesar, especially later on with Vercingetorix. But a lot of it is, poor strategy, and a lot of it is also just too little too late. I mean, if they aligned at the beginning, they could have crushed Caesar's one legion. And they could have also probably pushed them out of province as well. But yeah, apparently they were just much more concerned about like their little plot of land rather than, the bigger picture.
Well, but if you're going to be assimilated into a larger group, is it really preferable to be assimilated into a confederation of Gauls versus the Roman Empire? Why not just subject yourself to Rome if you don't mind being subject to somebody? And it seems that they are more prosperous because they've got all this trade that's coming north. So why would there be a preference for all the Gauls to come together?
Well, because of the threat of Rome expanding. I mean, obviously some tribes were aligned with Rome, but I mean, I don't think there were that many tribes. Most of them were, pretty much independent and maybe traded with Rome, but definitely didn't want to be a part of the Roman Empire. I mean, some tribes obviously, put up a fight and others didn't. So like, one tribe is definitely different than the other. It's not like a monolith or anything.
Well, oh, go ahead.
No, you go ahead first. I'd rather finish the conversation before I ask my question.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say was that my point is that at least what seemed to me towards the beginning to tend to be happening was that there was not a sort of democratic confederatory system that was taking place. It was a seizure of power by some groups of Gauls over others. So I can definitely see why the smaller tribes wouldn't want to be dominated by larger or more warlike ones. So in that respect, I can see that if they're trying to defend their freedom, then the other Gauls are just as much of a threat as the Romans are.
Yeah, kind of a enemy of my enemy sort of thing. My question was actually from the very beginning of the text. So there's that discussion about, I forget what the guy's name is, but he's a single Gaulish guy who's trying to like start everything off, but then he ends up killing himself for some reason. Like I really didn't understand why, because like ultimately the Helvetii wanted to go and conquest anyway. So why was this guy controversial? Like I don't really understand what was going on there. And maybe I misread it or something, but it was very confusing.
Did he actually kill himself, or was it just he allegedly killed himself?
Perhaps allegedly, but he ends up dead after either going before magistrates or going having some kind of dispute with the other people that are in power.
Yeah, because I thought that was just an internal power struggle within the Helvetii tribe, and
Okay.
he was captured, and they figure out his plot. And obviously, I mean, from what I read it, there's not like one singular leader of all the Helvetii people.
Yeah.
So I mean, I guess if the way I read it is, he tried to get too much influence and he tried to take over power, and other powerful people, didn't like it and probably just had him killed.
Yeah, it's just a very odd detail because like it doesn't, I mean, so there's his relationship with another one of the more important people for the rest of the book. But like other than that, it's really kind of not that important a detail from the context of the war itself. So I just find it kind of interesting that it is brought up.
To the point that Decimus Claudius made, it's interesting to me what he says about the governing structures among the Gauls, that it doesn't seem like they have kings per se. They have elected magistrates that serve for 1 year and have a lot of power. I recall reading that at one point. Maybe that's specific to one or more tribes and not all of the Gauls, but if others could confirm that interpretation.
I think there were different structures, if I recall correctly. I mean, sometimes you have magistrates and other times you have just like a chieftain or a leader. So
Yeah.
I think it really varies from tribe to tribe. And there's so many different tribes that that for a lot of the time I just, lose track.
Yeah, and it sounded like there were also some that were like based on an elders structure as well. But I think it was at some level different than the Germans, who had a kingship, right, or some kind of sovereignty model. What did you all think about the hilltop discussion between the German king and Caesar, and what happened there? So do you think, so like the major thing, I guess, was that there's this argument going on between the German king and Caesar about whether or not the German king has a right to, for one thing, be on the other side of the Rhine, and second, to defend his people who are already there. So he basically is telling Caesar to screw off the entire time, and I just thought it was really funny.
Mhm.
Was that Ariovistus?
I believe so, yes. And at the same time, so as they are, as they're having this argument back and forth, the Germans start attacking them, and start like throwing stuff at them, which I thought was very funny.
But I mean, at the beginning, he called him king and friend, and gave him a lot of
Yeah.
different presents, to start it off. But I guess that's more of a formality to kind of like flatter the other person's ego a little bit.
Yeah. And he's like totally not having it the whole time.
Yeah.
And they seem to be referencing, I'm not sure if it is, so was Teutoburg before this all happened?
No, afterwards.
After, okay. Because like Caesar keeps referencing the Rhine as like, you need to stay over there for some reason, but not really saying why. It's like he has this implicit understanding that Germans over there and everybody else over here. And Ariovistus is like, why does that have to be a thing? Like, why do I have to listen to you? I just thought it was interesting. If there was already some kind of agreement or something, but doesn't sound like there was.
Yeah, and in the book it says Ariovistus has 2 wives, and one of them was a Swabian.
Mhm.
So I mean, okay, Swabians were, I mean, obviously it's in Germany now, but that would be, I think back then it would have been considered Germany as well, right? Yeah, I believe Swabia is one of the German tribes.
Yeah,
But on
as
the correct side,
Tacitus.
on the correct side of the Rhine, but still German.
Yeah, and then his other wife is Celtic,
Yeah.
or they were until they were both killed. But that was another interesting detail. He's like, yeah, we killed both of his wives. They're like, okay, great.
But I thought that was also interesting because of polygamy. I mean, I've never heard of it in the Roman Empire, and I didn't know that it was really practiced among the tribes there. Although, I mean, it kind of makes sense if, for instance, if you want to be friendly with other kings and kingdoms to kind of like intermarry, and maybe if you have too many daughters or whatever the circumstances, but yeah, it might make sense. But I really haven't heard of polygamy in other instances in Gaul and in Germany. But I could also be wrong.
I think it was more of a thing in Germany than it was in Gaul. So I know that, later on in history, there was still a precedent for having more than one wife. So even into like Charlemagne's time, there were people who, or at least royalty, maybe not necessarily more common people, but royalty who would marry more than one person and have concubines as well.
Yeah, but I thought concubines is not actually a wife.
Correct.
Concubine is more of like a girlfriend that lives with you, as opposed to your wife.
But also still responsible for making children, right? So there was still that kind of expectation, I think, as well. So, but I think
children.
Yeah, they needed as many babies as they could make. So
that enough of them would survive.
Yeah, and hopefully have enough sons to have an heir, right? Because it was all male
Yeah,
only.
would be nice.
Yeah. So I think it was not super common, but I think it was more of a thing in Germanic cultures than in others. definitely. Okay. So if there aren't any other general things, are we interested in doing more books from the Gallic Wars, or would we like to do something else?
Personally, I'm not that interested in wars and soldiers,
Okay.
but I know that I might not be the biggest part of the group saying that.
So I'll reserve my thoughts until other people have had a chance to say anything.
I'm up for whatever. I mean, the reason why I mention, the Gallic War is because of Tacitus, and it's a nice little, comparison, and especially with some anecdotal information.
Mhm.
But on the other hand, I mean, I don't have to continue. I mean, I think that there's so many different just groups of people that, I mean, we could just go from one to the next. I mean, there's so many, different interesting civilizations on Rome's borders or that Rome conquered that, I mean, I would be up for moving on.
Okay. What about both of our Yuli?
Well, I'm sort of neutral. I agree with Machia that I'm not so much warfare person. I found it kind of difficult to follow when he was talking about different maneuvers and so forth, and I consider that from what other people have said, it gets to be more involved in the intricacies of battle in the later books. So I'm not sure how interested I would be, but on the other hand, once I've started something, it would be nice to finish it. So don't know if the rest of you
Yeah.
feel that way as well.
Yes.
So I'd be fine either way, I think.
I just want to point out one thing is that even though like these, like, okay, wars, like for instance, this book about war, I mean, it's very focused on the topic. There's so much little details involved, whereas if you read other books, I mean, it doesn't take you day to day, it doesn't give you like day-to-day information
Yeah.
about whatever topic or events. So it's really interesting. Obviously, you have to go through a lot of information about wars and battles of preparation to get like interesting nuggets of information. So I mean, it does have its advantages and disadvantages.
Yeah.
I mean, if like I also read Cassius, or part of it, Cassius Dio's Augustus, and whenever it comes to war, you have so much information, and whenever it doesn't come to war, I mean, the information and events like often are just skimmed over.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were as a whole culture so hyper focused on war that it. I mean, I understand why it is like that, definitely. Yuli, did you have any thoughts as well? Okay.
Yuli Laurenti,
Hmm.
rather than me, just in case you were not
Yeah.
aware that we were referring to you.
I wonder if he's listening. Anyway, so I'll throw my hat in the ring. So I definitely am very much like Magia and Yuli in that I have a really hard time following when there are really complicated military things going on. I just kind of, it goes out the window. So I would be interested in perhaps if we do want to continue at all with the Gallic Wars, maybe interspersing it on like a monthly basis or something with something else. So I actually recently picked up a hardback copy of Josephus, and I was interested if anybody else wanted to go through any of that material.
I just have to say, I read Josephus. It's one of my favorite books of ancient literature, but it also probably has the highest body count of any book I've read, other than like World War II atomic bomb. Like I mean, Josephus is very interesting. I mean, it has so much information about. I would say it probably has more information about the Jews than the Gallic War about the like the Gauls.
Just grabbing
However,
it.
however, I mean, it is brutal and bloody, but also very interesting, especially like the destruction of Jerusalem. I've been to Jerusalem, and it's interesting to see like some aspects of like, you know, walls that, or like rocks from that time that, you know, were preserved. But it's also a very bloody book, very. But but the narrative is easier to follow along because, for instance, in Julius Caesar's Civil War, there's so many tribes that, like, you know, crossing this river, that river, you kind of lose track. Whereas Israel is, I mean, it's not as complicated, but it's still a lot of fighting.
And out of the little that I have read of it, because it is I mean, we're not going to be reading the entire thing because it is gigantic, but it's a much better written text. And I feel like it's an easier read just in general. So if other people are interested, what I might do is like take a look. So I'll see if there's like a particular section that I think might be interesting for us, and then I'll, you know, present it over email, and see if we would like to do that.
I got my copy right here.
Yeah, like the thing is,
Sounds
I
like
mean,
a good
it's a brick, so.
Yeah, so it's over 400 pages of actual like text, according to my Penguins Classics. Although I do have to say the earlier parts deal more about like the Jewish history and the background of the conflict, and the later parts are just like, you know, the wars, the siege of Jerusalem, that sort of stuff.
Yeah, so I will probably restrict it to the Roman times, because that's the point, right? So the time of Roman influence it's actually relatively short, because Josephus is basically writing when the Romans are there. So I'll take a look, and again, if everybody's okay with it, I'll take a look and see if I'll maybe pick out one book for us to read for next time.
Sure.
Okay.
That sounds like fun. Yeah.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Maybe I overlooked it, but so in Caesar's book, I mean, I thought before you go to battle, you take like you take an augury. I mean, did that happen?
So
or did I overlook it?
That's really interesting, because yeah, he doesn't do anything like that. There's literally no mention whatsoever from the Roman side of any sort of lot taking or any sort of divination. However, it does show up on the German side. So, and I thought that was interesting. So he specifically says that they have, you know, like the old women of the tribe that are in charge of doing this divination. And he calls them ovates or vates, and that they actually decide not to attack because of them at a certain point. So that is, the Germans decide not to attack because they were told that they would not be successful.
Generally speaking, did the Romans do that before major battles, before campaigns, or was there some sort of
before campaigns?
Okay.
Yeah, so like if they were going to formally declare war on someone, they would have an augur, and they have a ceremony where they would throw a lance over the border, into the enemy territory. So this was but I'm not sure if that is, I'm not sure how often that was done, but I know that that is something that has been done. Okay, so the last thing that I wanted to mention is that we are officially at 6 months as of this meeting, which which means that we can formally apply to become a Sodalitas for Nova Roma. So what I will also be doing this month, hopefully, is putting in that request, and we'll see where it goes from there.
Cool.
Do you have bylaws written up?
No. So we're gonna have to work on that too. So perhaps we will actually have some back and forth over the email listserv. And I will be talking with, so we have the Media Atlantica discussion this evening. So I will talk to them about what goes into all that, because I really don't know. All right.
Okay.
Well,
Cool.
I have a
so
quick question.
yeah.
Just generally speaking, going forward, do you prefer to read ancient texts, or do you prefer to have a presentation, or do you like a 50-50 mix, or what are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, I'm kind of liking the readings right now, because I feel like it's more, it puts less pressure on one person, so that, if there are different people who have different things going on, you can read a tiny bit and you can still contribute. Whereas with the presentation, it's really just one person who has to focus. But, I also know that, for some things, it might be interesting to hear a presentation from somebody. So I'm not opposed to doing both of these things. I'm kind of preferring reading right now.
Okay, because I was thinking about doing a presentation about Lycia in
Yeah.
Turkey, because I'm going to be there in a couple of weeks. But on the other hand, I mean, if you prefer reading, I mean, that's fine too. It's
Well,
We don't have to do one thing or the other. We
That's
can say
true.
we read, but if there's someone who wants to have a presentation or something, please do. With lots of pictures, please.
yeah.
Oh, I mean, of course, and maybe, yeah. So I mean, it's fine. I mean, also, so I have a lot of things going on. So I mean, maybe it'll take a couple months to have a nice, polished PowerPoint presentation. But I mean, if you want me to, I could commit to doing that in the next few months.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, so because when is your actual trip?
I leave on the 27th or 28th to Antalya, and I'll
Okay.
be there for 10.5 days, primarily to Lycia, but I'll also be going around a little bit more. But I just thought that, Lycia is well known for those tombs that are cut into rocks that look like temples.
Yeah.
So I thought that, just sticking to that civilization before and during the Roman times, would be nice. They had also like their own language and different, like their own style of sarcophagi. So there is some like visual material that I could definitely photograph and include in a presentation.
Yeah. I mean, as I think we said last time, I would be very interested to see that. So if you think you would, so in order for us to determine when would be a good time, we have to actually decide on our next meeting date. So, usually Sundays have been working for us, but we have, so at the very least, if you wanted to present, it would be the 14th, would be the following Sunday.
Oh no, I arrived on the 8th from Turkey, so there's no way I could have a nice presentation. So that's why I'm thinking about June or July, just to give me some time.
Okay. So I guess the question is, do we want 14, 21, or 28 for May? And does it matter to anybody? I guess the 14th is Mother's Day in the United States, so we should probably avoid that.
I'm probably going to be in, oh God, what is it called in English? One of the Baltic states that day, so I'm not going to be there.
Okay. So it looks like the 21st and the 28th are both open in terms of like holidays and that stuff. Note that the 28th is the day before Memorial Day in the United States as well. But
The 28th is actually Mother's Day here in Sweden.
so perhaps the 21st is a good option then.
I'm just going to have a very quick peek when I'm going to have my daughter.
Sure.
The 28th would actually be better for me because then I don't have my child at home.
Okay.
So even though it's Mother's Day.
Ooh. For me, it's a little bit difficult because they're both in German,
Maybe
sort of
27.
long weekends. I mean, on the 18th is a Thursday, it's a Ascension Day, so I could take the day off and go somewhere. But on the 29th, it's also Whit Monday. So, but I could join from a hotel room wherever.
I mean, I guess there's also the option of doing a Saturday if we want, but
I'm fine like with the 28th, if that works.
okay. What about our other two?
I think I prefer to keep it on Sunday just because it seems to have been working rather than disrupting the schedule we've been doing. But
Okay.
between those two Sundays, I don't think there's a difference for me.
All right. I am a little bit concerned that I might get invited to something on the 28th.
We
So-
take 21st.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. All right. As long as everybody's okay with that.
Sure.
All right. So
I'm just slightly not concerned, but I'm just curious about how much reading will be involved between now and the 21st. But
yeah,
you'll just announce it in the next few days, right?
correct. I'm going to look at it, today, and then I would do my best to make sure that it's, the same amount or less than what we did for this one. Because honestly, for me, like I like to try reading like very close to the actual date when we're going to talk about it, because otherwise it just goes out the window. So
there, one suggestion is there's several different chapters that could be interesting that might not be next to each other in the book. For
Yeah.
instance, like chapter 7 is Judea under Roman rule, which is very interesting. And then maybe just pick out a few different chapters without having to, do like the first 5 or something, maybe like chapter 7 and then like a few others non-consecutively might be interesting to have like a good flavor.
right, and we can intersperse it with Gaul if we want to do that too. So no. All right. So I think that takes care of everything for now. So we've got a lot coming up. And thank you all again for coming and for such a nice, lively conversation. And I will talk to you all later. Bye.
All
right.
right.
Thank you very much.
like
Good
the-
day. Bye.
Bye.